Jake couldn't recall the last time he felt this out of place. Eastside Eddie's was the sort of bar you'd find in a low-budget indie film, a place meant to capture the gritty aesthetic of forgotten neighborhoods. He realized this wasn't where he was supposed to be just moments after stepping through the front doors. But he didn't have much of a choice. Despite the warnings of his friends outside, despite all his best judgment as they walked through the back alley shortcut to get to the newest nightclub spot, despite the strange smells wafting from the front door, his need to use the restroom had been building, so he decided to brave whatever state Eastside Eddie's facilities were in. His friends were busy arguing directions outside, and despite the assurances that this was the fastest way, he didn't see them getting there anytime soon. The dim lighting inside the restroom was not a good sign. The room was small, just 2 urinals and a stall with a questionable-looking door marred with nonsensical graffiti. One flickering overhead bulb did its best to cast shadows over sticker and spray paint-laden walls. A dripping faucet played a lonely tune. As Jake sidled up to the, surprisingly, marginally cleaner urinal, he felt a presence beside him. Before he could even glance over, a voice floated over.
Your skin, it's quite a stunning tan, especially in this light.
It sent a shudder down Jake's back.
This would happen to me,
he thought. Jake looked sideways to see a tall man, perhaps in his mid-40s, leaning against the sink. He looked out of place, well-groomed, buttoned up, and his demeanor too poised for the grunge of Eastside Eddie's.
Thanks?
Jake muttered, his discomfort evident, trying to finish up as quickly as possible. The man didn't stop.
Oh man, in those eyes. Didn't catch him before, but now that you've turned around. Damn. They're deep, like undisturbed soil.
Jake tried to chuckle it off.
That's a new one. I think I gotta go. Nice to meet you.
Before Jake could zip up and make a swift exit, the stranger tilted his head, blocking the doorway slightly, examining Jake with a clinical interest.
Your bone structure, too. I must say, it's quite admirable. Sculpted, almost. You don't meet too many people with features like yours.
Yeah, sure, buddy.
Jake replied, his voice trailing off. Jake began to work around the man cautiously, avoiding the stranger's gaze in the cracked mirror above the sink. The exit was mere steps away. Just as Jake thought he was free from the restroom's confines, a voice from behind called out.
Oh, and by the way...
Without thinking, he turned. In that split second, the stranger swooped by his side. There was a sense of panic as Jake saw something black and silver, quickly slapping a hand to his throat as the cool touch made contact.
I think this would suit you perfectly.
The man stepped back, a satisfied grin on his face. Jake looked down to see the clasp closing over his Adam's apple, a black leather collar wrapped tightly around his neck. Panic started to seize Jake as he spoke.
What the hell?
What did you do?
The deep timbre of his voice was instantly gone, the tone sweet and undeniably feminine. A chill shook Jake's spine as he placed a hand over his throat, speaking again.
What is this?
Jake felt an odd sensation, like an electric pulse originating from the collar and radiating outward. It prickled his skin and crawled up his spine, making him shiver. He tried once more to pull it off, but it seemed fused to him. His heart raced.
What's happening to me?
His voice was softer and higher. The man's eyes flickered with the bulb overhead.
God, I love this part.
Jake's focus shifted to his hair, feeling it growing, the familiar spikes melting away as the strands lengthened, cascading down. It became slick and straight, a dark waterfall that reached the middle of his back,
Oh my god, stop this. I beg you, please.
But the changes continued. The sensation traveled to his face. His jawline softened, cheekbones raising slightly. His masculine, angular features slowly melted away to become a more rounded feminine portrait. He felt his nose reshape. The strong, defined jut he once had shrank back to a subtly pronounced tip, and his lips plumped just a tad. A bizarre feeling, like they jittered with a strange numbness before a wave of tingling pleasure coursed from his mouth. He gasped in spite of himself. His eyes widened in the cracked mirror as he saw the transformation. He couldn't even look at the feminine face gaping back at him. His eyes were drawn downward, to his shrinking and now more slender body. He could feel as his body began shifting, his midsection contracting, waist cinching inward and creating an hourglass shape. Looking down, he watched in horror as his hands began to shrink, and his tan skin now appeared softer, more delicate. He looked down to see his once flat chest pushing outward, forming noticeable breasts that only continued to strain. His jeans shrank up, turning into a much smaller fit that went to just below the curve of his buttocks, showcasing his longer and shapelier legs. He felt a new shiver as the cool air of the restroom flicked across his now exposed skin. Jake's heart raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and disbelief.
Why are you doing this to me?
He groaned as his chest strained further, his modest breasts squeezing and expanding against his now incredibly tight shirt, riding up, revealing a toned midriff. He felt the fabric of his sleeves and collar dissolve away, leaving just a skin-tight tank top in their midst. The transformation seemed complete. Jake, now in the body of a petite yet curvaceous girl, stared at the stranger, anger burning in those same chocolate brown eyes.
Change me back. I don't understand.
She felt the urge to fall to her knees, pleading with him. He had seemed creepy before, yet now towering over him in size and stature, Jake felt terrified. The man tilted his head, seeming to sense her fear, and spoke softly.
But you look perfect.
The words floated to her mind, causing a flush of heat to grow. She didn't want to feel satisfaction with that thought, and yet, the sheer completeness of the statement was refreshing.
No, you can't. You can't do this.
The mental fight was wearing her out. She couldn't figure out why she was having such a reaction. The man took a deliberate step closer, invading Jake's personal space.
You'll find that the collar does more than just change your appearance. Since I collared you, I get to make some choices, like this.
He leaned in, whispering the next words like a sinister lullaby.
You're happy I changed you.
A rush of emotion surged through Jake, contrasting sharply with the dread and fear he had been feeling moments before. An inexplicable giddiness bubbled up inside him, as though he were on the verge of laughing. It felt like a foreign entity, attempting to smother his original emotions, attempting to rewrite his own feelings about the transformation. Jake's heart raced, battling the influx of elation. His thoughts felt fragmented, trying desperately to hold on to his original identity and emotions. The weight of the sudden happiness was oppressive, like being trapped under a heavy, warm blanket, with the room's temperature steadily rising.
No,
Jake murmured, his voice edged with both denial and disbelief. He tried to push back against the foreign emotion, to center himself in the reality he knew, but it felt like trying to swim upstream. Despite the internal struggle, a giggle escaped his lips. Why had he been upset? He looked over his new body. The endless curves, softness, he stared down the valley of cleavage that obstructed his view. He was gorgeous. He felt so good, so warm.
That's better.
The man murmured, watching with a satisfied grin. As the seconds passed, the imposed giddiness began to dominate, suffocating his genuine emotions. He felt his resistance wane, fatigue overtaking him. It felt so good. How could it be bad if it feels so good? A voice in his mind shouted, telling him to resist. But that voice seemed sillier as time went on. More absurd. Why would he want to go back? He giggled again as the euphoria ripped through his mind, pushing back all resistance.
Thank you.
Jake whispered dreamily.
That's more like it. But I'm not sure if I believe you.
In that moment, Jake was consumed with fear. He was so happy. This man had helped him be happy. So impossibly, mind-blowingly happy. And yet, as Jake looked over the stranger, he could only see disappointment. Why was he screwing this up? What if the man was so upset he changed him back?
How can I thank you?
Jake asked. The man smirked.
Oh, I'm sure we could figure something out.